Welcome to the first Fine Arts Foundation talk of this 2019-2020 year. This is our first of the season. Couple of little businessy things. You probably got the membership letter that had the trifold schedule of events for the year. If you didn't, there's some on the back table. In general, we try and have our talk first and our tea later, but it's totally fine if you're snacking otherwise, but that's kind of the general intent. If you are a member for 2019, we will continue sending you the postcard each month until November, and after that you won't get another until you renew. And you won't be invited to the member-only event in January. So sometime before November, if you wish to join or renew, please do. And if you didn't get a program brochure, they're on the back table there. Also on the back table, Elizabeth brought some of her books, which are hot off the presses, and you can look at those after you hear her speak. And I think that's all the business. So let me just read an introduction, if you don't mind. A native Californian, Elizabeth Turk is an artist who has been primarily known for marble sculpture. In 2010, she was awarded a MacArthur Fellowship and the Anna Lee and Barnett Newman Foundation Award. Today, she splits time between her studio in Santa Ana, California, and New York City. Turk received her MFA from Maryland Institute College of Art, Reinhardt School of Sculpture in 1994, and her BA from Scripps College in Claremont in 1983. She has been represented by Hirsch and Adler Modern since 2000 and continues to exhibit more experimental work in other venues. She spoke to us at Fine Arts exactly 5 years ago today about her incredibly delicate-looking marble work when she was showing at the Laguna Museum. Turk's work searches the boundaries of paradox, the contemporary in the traditional, the lightness in weight, the emptiness in mass, the fluidity of the solid, extended time in a moment. Reducing hundreds of pounds of stone to essential matrices of 5 to 25 pounds, her intricately carved sculptures defy gravity and make possible that which seems impossible. Inspired by the natural world, she references its myriad of elegant organic structures. Yet her work is not complete until abandoned to larger environments, humbling the intensity of her creative focus. I am thrilled to have Elizabeth Turk speaking to us today because she's using her art installations and performances to build community, both human and nature. I keep thinking one has to choose between environmental action and art, and she is doing both. The Tipping Point series, now at the Catalina Island Museum, until March 2020, comprises 3 elements: echoes of extinction, extinct and endangered animal sound columns, migration patterns, an experiential gate installation, and Are We Creating a Silence, a community contemplative experience. She will introduce her current project so much better than I, so please welcome back to Scripps, Elizabeth Turk. It's not on. Are you going to use this one?
I'll use this one.
Then let me...
I got it. You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's wonderful to be back here, as always. I put together a lecture today because I wanted to approach my work, sort of integrating my background in a more intimate way, I guess because Scripps is a place of beginning for me. And there have been times when I've experimented with lectures here. And so I guess in some ways that's what this is, because I find that when I speak solely to my art, I hide myself and my beginnings, and I wanted to, in the arms of safety, I guess, just reflect on all the different aspects, the different influences that have come to create my work. So before I composed this lecture, I went walking through the Met last week and was reminded of the objects that I've come to love and have meant so much to me. And as I had comprised the title for this talk, I really started to think about the difference between creating an object and creating an experience as two very separate things. And so this lecture is really talking about that division, because you could argue that they are the same, but I'm looking at them as two very divided aspects of art making. So one of my favorite, perhaps, well, at this moment now, the favorite object in the Met are these lips, these jasper lips. They're so beautiful, and in so many ways they connote the magic an object can convey when you have absolutely zero idea to the context. I have no idea of the political constraints, the person, the education, even the entire body that was surrounding this fragment, and yet the magic of the beauty, the intimacy others felt because they kept it sacred for all these years. And so I love the breadth that all those reflections kind of explode in my mind. It's like a moment in time that's a narrative, and yet it's not moving in my mind as a narrative. In my mind, it's reminiscent of a beautiful figurative sculpture, the most amazing kissable lips I've ever seen, the tediousness of sanding, the other fragments that which would have surrounded this piece, and perhaps even the horrible colors that I would never have found aesthetically pleasing, as this yellow jasper is so bold, and yet these lips have such magic to me. So for me, this is the essence of making an object that has the ability to transcend time and transcend its natural context or its original context. I add this slide because this is the house that I lived in as a junior high school student. And as a very waspy-looking Southern Californian, it's hard to imagine that a mud house could have such impact. So I think that showing this intimacy, it reveals a part of myself, but it also reveals an organic aesthetic, which was really important. On the right, this is the very first art class that I remember having impact. Was a selected class as a junior high school student. We had Native American Indians come and teach us painting. This, to me, is the beginning of painting. And I never realized how unusual that was until probably living in New York or moving back to Southern California. But for me, the idea of painting was interactive. It was made of stone dust. I go back. It was made of stone dust, and at the end, we had to take it outside to the desert and watch as the wind came and just blew it all away. We couldn't take it home and put it on a refrigerator like later I would do. And to the left is a pot from Acoma, which was a place that my parents would love. I shouldn't have done it so fast. Would love to take us. Acoma was a family weekend trip, and so again, the patterns, the aesthetic was so completely different than what I would later come to learn as my given heritage. the man that you keep seeing here is my father. And this is how I began to look at rocks very intimately. And they were to transcend time. This is the limestone that I came to love as marble. And so for me, the idea of rocks has always been historical. It has not been, it has not been this or this. This neoclassical art, I came to learn, is what I should have thought of as marble sculpture. Instead, I would dissect things like I did the sand painting. The sand paintings, there is a meaning to them. There is a meaning to every, okay, we'll try again. So this was the history of stone, time and space in a moment. Now we go. So every bit of artwork, every bit of rock had to be dissected. As you can see, growing up with a man that looked at a rock as deeply as my father did. Even when we came home to talk about our sand paintings, it was to dissect the art, whether it was the calcium or the iron oxide. It was to understand the elements that were a part of that image more deeply. Even later, this image is from a sketchbook probably about 3 years ago. I find that orientation just is infused in my fingertips. And the idea of creating art that related to a Greek mythology was as anathema as going to the moon, in a sense. And I had to even I had to look up the words, the references. I mean, truly, what was the value of constancy when most of my life to that point had been impermanent and not necessarily a Western value, I guess. But ironically, Reinhardt, this is the sculpture from the namesake of the school from which I received my graduate degree. So I've come to love the beauty that neoclassical work tried to embody. But I think for me, it was the intimacy in the flower and the intimacy in a small gesture where I could find a sense of commonality. But it was certainly in their abilities that I found a goal. Cleopatra here, on the other hand, I find an amazing challenge as a marble sculptor when people come to me and talk about neoclassical art as my heritage. I look at this type of work and I think that I can't relate at all. I can't find anything in this that relates to an idea that emotes a meditation on suicide. I don't feel that. I feel an angry, powerful woman, but with a sliding drag gown, and somehow it seems slightly silly. And so I find when I'm dressed like this in my studio, I have nothing to do with what is a marble sculptor's heritage, or at least I feel I'm still trying to find it. This is the studio in California. It's in the middle of a marble yard. Some of you have been there. It's a fantastic place to work. I'm kind of a parasite on the ongoings of a working home builder's marble studio. So I have access to a tremendous number of tools and equipment and stronger people. This is my work on the far right, and you can see the orientation still references the plants, the environment, the structures that are around us every day. To give you a sense of scale, I thought I would just give a working shot. The patterns that I continue to reference are those that create a balance, that create symmetry, that are both the internal structures that support our beings, whether they are skeletal structures or those that we see around us in nature, the golden rule, the golden mean. Several years ago, I was a Smithsonian Fellow, and though I like to reference internal structures, I wanted to delve deeper. And thinking about my material as limestone, then metamorphosed limestone, and then the beautiful shapes of marble. If you delve into that structure, you have the most essence of the most beautiful history, because marble truly is a memorial stone. It holds calcium carbonate on so many levels. It holds those structures that we no longer see, and so I wanted them to exist in a new form. I looked at seashells. These are the X-rays of seashells. And these images I keep in this, I reference this not only in the studies as they came out in graphite, but later as a part of the experiences that we're doing now. The intensity of focus in these really go back to the beauty of those Acoma pots, the beauty of the sand painting as one had to focus to get that intense line. But there's found in that focus a meditation and loss of self that for me allows my world to be ordered. And as selfish as it is, it seems to open a larger set of references, so that I hope that this work can explode in other people's minds just as those Jasper lips explode in mine. The collars, as I came to call these pieces, seem to me to need a stillness. Though the structures could reference things that were in motion or in change, I found, and I think it's because my sister had moved to Southeast Asia, and I fell upon the sculptures left behind by the Khmer peoples. I found that in their beautiful sort of rough stage, as the vines kind of took over the temples of Angkor Wat, I found there was something refreshingly strong about these enormous heads looking down at me, kind of through the jungle. The ability to find strength and kind of a compassionate or kind look or gesture seemed so much more powerful than that neoclassical Cleopatra. I don't know. Somehow I could relate to it, and I found it refreshing that there was a stillness to these pieces. And I guess even though I was midway through creating the collar series, I found that just having them straight on their bases, I hoped would kind of echo that, so one could experience a group of standing figures as you walked through them. Unfortunately, when we exhibited them in a gallery setting, everybody immediately only thought of lace. And to me, that just brought the references into this very narrow kind of Western interpretation that really is all me in one sense. But I was hoping that they were so much more. And so when I went home, I threw many of them out into the nature that surrounded me, which is Newport Beach, Huntington Beach. And ironically, the moment that we put them under the pier, their meaning changed 180 degrees. So rather than people coming up to me and asking me if I carved lace, I had surfers coming out of the ocean and asking me, wow, did you just find the jaws of a shark? Like, what is that? Can I touch it? It was really astounding how quick the context changed the meaning. So that led me to this idea of emptiness, stillness, emptiness. The reference of what's not there is so significant after you've been in front of a block of stone for, I don't know, years. I can't even compute the hours. But I started to think more about the richness of emptiness than the solidness of the physical. And I love these three references, whether it was William Kendridge talking about the emotional ideas of emptiness and the absence of a loved one, the fullness and the richness and the overwhelming existence of that emptiness. Or in Joseph Kasuth, like, where is it that intellectually you make the connection to what is and what isn't? Is it the space between the object, or is it only in your mind? Where is that a translation? And then my absolute favorite, in Pompeii, when I was still a political science student, I visited Pompeii, and for the very first time saw the story of the I'm sure all of you are rich with knowing the holes that people would fall into during the excavation. And I don't know how many holes were lost before somebody poured in plaster to find the richness of this story. And so this concept of kind of what existed in what is seemingly empty space, kind of the shadows of what was, has lived for decades in my mind. And moves very quickly to what became the essence of these objects. When I tried to find the moment where a structure could exist, not implode, and could still contain empty space, and really be about the space that was, because you can only truly have this conversation in stone because the material has a physicality that is innately felt. So to me, this as an object can again explode in this really beautiful, rich, huge conversation. I had no idea if it would actually work. So there were many terrifying moments with these pieces. Again, the studio to give you a sense of scale. But the concept was, if you moved into a piece of marble the way that you can move into a newfound friend's life very slowly without tempting it to break because you hit upon a bruise or a moment that has been left behind by life's experiences, maybe you can push that structure a little bit further than what you would have thought you could if you had planned it. So with that conceptual parameter, I just proceeded to hollow out. So this piece is a single line. It's a little bit of the science motif. I guess I still can't get over the Mobius strip concept, but like all things, it kind of went on steroids. When they're displayed, because I realized that it takes people a long time to realize that this is actually stone, we exhibit them with a solid block. So the conversation stays about that space and about what is not there. It led me to think about impermanence and the change of context of what speaking with the vocabulary of stone, could you make that stone move? Can you make the static mobile? I noticed that stone has such a memory, and the tension within these pieces, because they're so highly carved, would really need to be released in a different ether, something outside the natural gravitational pull that we all know and feel. So I started sticking them in pools. Researching structure, these are the smallest corals, probably the size of a piece of sand that exist at the bottom of the ocean. Again, the structures that are part of my loved material, but which also go to the dialogue that I think still exists within the stone itself. This is marble, the shape of marble. This is the space between. These are perhaps in the neoclassical sculpture what would be looked at as imperfections. These are the evaporated patterns or columns made by the atmosphere when the molten or high-pressured liquid was coagulating, and it just didn't escape. So you'll find these weaknesses, and instead of starting again or starting anew, I just wanted to embrace them and find out what they were and what they really looked like. That story, frankly, because you can smell it sometimes when you're carving, is so much more interesting than perhaps my ideas on a sculpture itself. But it led me to think about the interior and what it would be to look through the stone itself and into the base. So this is looking up through the marble sculpture and then down through and into the stainless steel base, where I tried to create a pattern of the infinite. Again, it then folds back into this ongoing and continual investigation. And I brought these slides because these images, the beauty of different seashells, something that is this sculpture that we see every day along the beach and can look at so sentimentally, has become such a profound element in my work. And I wanted to give it a sense of authority rather than a sense of a trivial, because it was so common. It pops up again. Boy, that was loud. It pops up again in the experiences. So, thinking about the landscape of what isn't, and sculpting to such a high degree, you cannot have but a conversation to yourself about your own just ego. And you start to think so often about this amazing intention that you're trying to impart on the stone. And I've often said that I think that the stone, in the end, will have carved me so much more than after 30 years than I will ever the stone. But to be able to contrast that with the ever more beautiful rocks that surrounded it became the essence of the next body of work. And these pieces where I wanted to invade what was, but also to contrast that idea of just stepping back and looking at what is, removing myself somewhat, seemed to be already done, like, as all things, and it gave me a much more profound doorway through which to walk for such a beautiful tradition of the scholar stones. And though I'd seen them in gardens all over Southern California, I really hadn't entered that realm of art, and without having spent so much time trying to impart my will upon such a hard material, I don't think I would have had the appreciation for just how profound nature had changed these objects, but also just the essence of meditation in that way. And so this is a beautiful stone that is a part of the garden at the Met that I've always loved. But it was reminiscent of the images that that Edgerton took of the test atomic bomb blasts in my home state of New Mexico. And these images seem to me to symbolize disruption. They came to have more impact to me as the years have gone by. We did a piece that was suspended. In the last show, this piece was suspended. This is my backyard in Newport. But this is a tidal basin. So on the wall, while we were all in New York, we had this time going, this Insta camera going. And so we projected this on the wall. And it looked like there was just a single wire. And this let's see if I can. But the piece itself is suspended from the heavens over the oncoming tide. So it looks as if it's just over the water. And I loved how it would sit there swirling over and over. And somehow I realized that I had referenced the scholar stones, but I had also tried to bring in, intuitively had brought in something that was very very disruptive, and it had a great deal of tension because you kept waiting for it to drop, especially when people walked by the pathway, and you could just see the tops of their heads through the video. But there was something really beautiful about that reference and kind of the intuitive way that I was starting to synthesize. I like the way that these pieces were starting to synthesize objects that were taken perhaps out of their context, but then put into a new context, and that we all seem to come to love and appreciate in very interpretive ways. But they're becoming a part of our alphabet, whether they are the neoclassical pieces or the Nefertiti lips. Anyway, I wanted to put the original references. This is a part of the study, the links that I put together so that people would understand the image, the mandala image that we came to use on top of the umbrellas. Again, I had looked at these structures always architecturally and always in the guise or under the idea that I was going to create a self-supporting object out of them, until a friend of mine told me, why don't you just think smaller and just put this on an umbrella or a small tent or something that's not quite as ambitious. But of course, this kind of got amped up as I decided to look at, this is the front yard of my grandparents' beach house. So this became the field, the idea of the field. I've always loved the Noguchi Gardens that we have here, and have thought that we were so lucky here in Southern California to have Noguchi. Someone to do a garden of this size here, and I spent so many hours that I didn't realize how much I had internalized his idea of elements on a field until I had gone to Kyoto and realized that this idea of looking at a garden from different angles and from each perspective, one could have a completely different interpretation and context without knowing or without seeing its entirety. And so I became obsessed with the idea of seeing, of presenting this idea as first as a static field, very much so, but also that this concept of the the reflection that one would see from above, and setting it to motion. That is, again, this paradox of what's static yet moving, not only in the ancient Indian sculpture, but in the Ganesh, my all-time favorite Ganesh. I mean, who embodies wisdom and laughter better than, or wisdom and joy than this Ganesh? This, I realized, became a great influence on trying to get the idea of movement for the umbrellas. So the way that we would photograph, or the way that we would set alive our field, was with inviting people to that plane, picking up the gift of the umbrella and photographing it with long exposures so that it would become something else. And also in making the field full of moments. And many of those moments were to be ignited, I guess is the best word, by dancers that are groups of dancers that we invited to create their own dance on our palette, but to really think about how nature moves, how jellyfish swarm or starlings interact. And so we thought that if we intersperse dancers with the invitation to 1,000 participants on the beach, that maybe we would create a psychological plane where people, we hoped, would experience joy, perhaps mimicry, or mimicking those around them that were more familiar with the prop of the umbrella, and they would somewhat hide under the umbrella, but then they would be released into just sort of that magic, the magic moment of the Ganesh that was both wise because they're creating an artwork and they're starting to think of themselves from above because they're creating an image that we were photographing from that position of enlightenment. So they'd have to create their own individual movements, but see themselves as part of a whole. And that was the idea. I don't know if fish see themselves as part of a whole when they're creating these beautiful images, but I thought that handing out images like this to our dancers, that we would inspire a different type of movement with our simple prop. We filmed at different angles, heights, to get the idea of the individual, but also the community itself. I think that the success of this project was that everybody who participated was both an artist and the audience. And then in the end, this is what you'll find in the book back there. In the end, this is truly a climate change piece because the goal is to photograph in this way the beaches around to surround the Pacific, so that in 10 years, 5 years, if we go back and photograph the change, we will have documented not only the shorelines, but the communities that exist along those shorelines. These were some of the starlings that fit some of my all-time favorites. We've all seen those mermations, I think, by this point. This, if we can get the video, I love watching. And I think on our website we have a longer video where you can see the tide come in and push people back and forth as they start to chase the waves. And as people are empowered to create their own designs, there was such intense joy and excitement, whether it was opening and closing the umbrella prop, or just moving in together and creating patterns. But anyway, on the website, the full video is seen. So always this idea of space and time. These are images from the sketchbook, but they integrated together into a larger mural. And they also, a mural meditation, which is the background. As we work through the experiences, we continue the meditations on in the stone. So this too is one line. This image gives you a sense of scale. My Santa Ana team. This is a single line. So again, with the idea of stillness, the time consumed in just finding that line, I think when this is exhibited, it's still in the studio. I think we need to have 2 chairs because it took me about 3 days and a dedicated pink chalk to go back and find it when we were carving it so that we wouldn't get lost. But the change from stillness to activating that field at the beach is kind of the dialogue between creating an explosive object and creating a narrative, a footprint for a narrative. I put these sound columns. This is part of Tipping Point that Beth so lovely introduced to you guys. They reference some of my favorite sculptures, the Brancusi, but these are in the studio now. These are the sound of a bald eagle. So the idea is that the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has been recording sound since 1929, and many of the birds have gone extinct. On Catalina Island, they're so proud of the bald eagle and bringing back the bald eagle. So we decided to take the sound of the bald eagle, and just on the iPhone, I recorded it, and we translated it into a 3D object. We took, these are created in recycled aluminum, and there are the ivory-billed woodpecker on the far left, the marsh wren. When you walk by these, there are QR codes that will take you to the sounds themselves. But basically, they're amplifications. So the woodpecker over here, you can see his sound is ba 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 ba, like, and so you can kind of get a visual sense of the oral. And we're still in the midst of making this piece, so it's the latest passion. But I love the idea that, again, talking about emptiness and the trace, I guess, what we're leaving behind as we walk through life on this planet, and there are fewer and fewer birds. The idea that we have such an impact on those sounds, I wanted that to become full. So the more you see the kind of the emptiness of sound, and the more you see the sounds that are no longer, the more rich this piece becomes. Because we're on Catalina Island, we were inspired to look at the oceans, and we took the sound of the vaquita porpoise and sea whales. This is the sea whale. You can hear this whoa, whoa, kind of, at least when I look at it now, because I've been in it so much, I hear this deepness, and the rings, the discs, took us to the maximum of the lathes. The opening, we gave everybody, for the opening at Catalina with the template of Shoreline, we gave everybody an LED candle with the prompt of writing the name, the word, that which you cannot stand to lose. We wanted to embark upon the idea of creating memories that were more than a visual sense, a memory that was activated by motion, perhaps sound, And so through the long exposures, once again, everybody wrote all that they cannot stand to lose. This is the other piece that's on Catalina. It's the cage piece. These panels move. It's from above you can see, you can see the shadows. So we took the same birds that you see the sound, and we made them, we linked them together as flocks, basically. And the patterns you see are the patterns of our freeway systems. They are the interchanges. So we have the flocks following the 405 where it meets the 73, and the I think one is the 5, and somewhere further in in LA. And the outer ring is the targets. So the idea is that the further the more extinctions, the greater the maze. When you get, you can see the 2 rings. I could only afford to do 2, and this is on the roof of the museum, so we had to carry all the panels up to the roof to install it. But the interior is composed of reflective panels. So when you go into the interior, you disappear behind the mirror, behind the one-way mirror. You can see out, but you become infinite, much like the interior of the empty sculptures. And those who are looking through the maze just hear your sound. So there is a little bit of overlap. It was also a place for selfies, so everybody in the interior. This was, again, from the evening. This was what a single motion looked like. The night, again, like Shoreline, the night brought these moments, these beautiful moments where we captured a single word. But what was amazing was that people were doing this without knowing what they were writing, without knowing what how their wake looked. And so it wasn't until later that they could see how well they connected their words or not. But what we loved is that at the end, we zoomed the drone up. And for me, this felt like an ascension. It felt, once again, like Shoreline, everybody coming together and creating a single pattern, and where they finally see themselves as a single community, kind of once again. So that's, to me, the most optimistic part on which I can leave or say that's it. But I think that, to me, this exhibit, Tipping Point, was probably the more chilling, in a sense, because there were so many ways that you walked into the conversation about extinction. And I found that people experienced it individually and very personally, and yet they talked about it. It wasn't something outside. It was a personal experience of writing something and engaging. That once again, by creating a platform and sort of seeing what would happen, it created a different type of memory. And if we are our memories, if we are just a combination and a container for a whole bunch of different memories, I just wanted art to have a different accessibility than solely as a visual object that somehow seemed a little bit further away. And so I think that that's the joy in trying to create a platform that allows more people to become artists as well as audience of art. So on that, I thank you all so much for your time. Can you hear this?
Would anyone like a question?
That was exquisite. Thank you so much. I'm wondering what sort of the impetus was for you to move into this realm of public engagement. If there was a turning point in your studio practice that inspired you to take it into more of a public engagement realm, and maybe what that was specifically, if anything?
It's a good question, and it has probably several answers, actually. When I first started making art, I wrote a book about like this of all the projects that I wanted to do. And I figured in my 20s, 30s, it kind of went into my early 50s, I could do the very intense physical work. And so as that time period started to come to an end, I wanted to move into more conceptual work. It had always sort of been a plan. But I think that the experience platform, and I guess we're still trying to come up with exactly what we're doing, kind of moving installations or something. The impetus is what we feel around us. I felt very close to failure as an artist in this climate, because I look at art as a vocabulary that can transcend politics, and that can be a beautiful doorway to really deep conversations. And I find that the more successful my work, or the more expensive my work was becoming, the more rarefied its community. And I wanted to find a doorway back to a larger conversation. And I felt I also wanted to find a platform that wasn't intellectual, that people could experience art from the gut first and learn an intellectual template or conversation later. And so for each of these, whether it's Shoreline or Tipping Point, the conversation starts with something very simple. In fact, that's what we were talking about a bit at lunch. It's a symbol of a bird or a seashell. It's something that is much more populist in a way, and that everybody has a relationship with that simple element of life. It's not a doorway that you need a degree for. And I found that these experiences were growing. The museum thought we would have about 300 people for Shoreline. We ended up having 4,000. And that was so much so that I thought we would be fined. The police called the next day. Like, did you know that all these people? So I found that reaction so uplifting. It was so uplifting. The desire to have an experience where you bumped into the unknown and it was okay was desired, and the conversations that then happened were what I had hoped the objects would inspire. But the object as a symbol needed a context, and I think that the experiences went about trying to create that concept for the unexpected bumping into. So I think I was also really, remember when Nixon went to China and the violin suddenly became a mode of communication. And that, I think I was very young watching that, but I remember listening to, who was it? Maybe it was Perlman, who was speaking about how that instrument just opened up vast worlds that were closed. So I guess that was my hope, that experiences would open up a vast world. So. Mm-hmm.
We had an experience recently. We were down in Carlsbad for a week. We saw no seagulls at all. 2 pelicans. And I read in the Times that they have falconers come in because the seagulls were grabbing people's food. But it was an experience of extinction. I could not believe being in the ocean and not seeing one seagull. So that's just an aside. We're going to Catalina on next Wednesday to the museum to see the exhibit, and I hope I see seagulls.
Well, it's stories of extinction when we were reading about them, and in fact, it was a Scripps intern who did where's Mary? Yeah, it was one of Mary's interns that did a lot of the original research for us, thankfully. But the stories are so profound in that every extinction, whether it was the fashion in the late 1800s with the macaw-type parrots and the exotic feathers in women's hats or within capes, or the pigeon being such a tasty treat up in New York. The birds were so overwhelming. The stories that the passenger pigeon, the flocks were so huge, they darkened the sky for 3 days. You would read these accounts in the late 1800s. There were so many that the impact of just my one person taking a feather won't make a change. And the same with the seashells. Going to the beach, we would take abalone shells as kids. It breaks my heart. I never thought about my impact as changing so dramatically. So I think that those conversations can also happen in the reverse. We can start to live with pigeons, dropping on our sandwich, or we can kind of learn to live with a little messiness, sort of kind of one seashell at a time or one bird at a time, and it can move in the opposite direction as well, I believe, but I hope.
I was just wondering, the rings that are in your piece on Catalina, were those plasma cut, or did you cut all of?
Those were
the
laser
negative
cut.
space- laser
Those were
cuts, okay.
laser cut. The birds those are 8x4 foot steel panels, and they were cut industrially. Yeah. But first we experimented with water jet, and then moved to laser. There's some cool video of that, though.
So those must have been pretty heavy taking them up to the roof then.
The whole installation, from barge to crate to, it was doing something on an island is a challenge. So.
Just thank you for such a articulate and beautiful presentation. I just have to say, we really appreciate your time. One of the messages I'm getting from my students here these days is the connection between environmental sustainability and cultural sustainability. And I love the way your art straddles that and articulates that in interesting ways. And this is a big challenge for us, is how do we find ways of combining the natural world with our culture and going forward. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, success.
One more question? No, all right. Oh,
Yeah, I have a question about process, which fascinates me. You kept referring to we and us. You showed pictures of your team. Do you work with the fellows, and do they have an artistic background, or what? Tell us about your process.
I stopped using I several years ago when I started to realize just how many people, not only, I never really liked using I, because I know that anybody growing up on the beach, you saw the image of what I say always, my grandfather would always say, my big bathtub out there, the Pacific. You stand on the shoulders of those who came before you. And I think that as years went by, even though I would spend hours in my studio, the machine that started to be behind me with the gallery and the crating and the shipping and the years I've spent with the mount makers and the earthquake prevention, everybody that helped make those pieces come alive. It just seems so narrow. And most of the time, it just seems so narrow and really not very true. And so a few years ago, when we decided to do projects, we became a nonprofit so that the experiences could kind of move on a separate plane. And I hired a separate team to work with me on the nonprofit side. And so it just seemed more honest because there are so many people that have donated time, money, effort. The team for Shoreline is enormous, shockingly so. And I have to say the people that have stayed with us doing these are amazingly kind, patient, persistent. If you're not, we kind of paid you your fee and somehow you were sort of left behind somewhere because it just, or you sent me nasty texts and then that was the end of you. But they're just, it's just a group effort. It's such a group effort. And then when I saw the 1,000 people moving in such beautiful ways on the beach on Laguna, I can't do that on my own. There's just no way. So it just seems much more appropriate. So thank you for letting me say that.
Elizabeth, what's the name of the nonprofit?
ET Projects.
ET Project.
So it's kind of a little extraterrestrial. So
I think let's give Elizabeth another hand.